author here. If you like this story, please don't forget to support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. And maybe sharing it with someone else you think you like it too. Thank you and happy listening.
The Girl and the Tear in the Universe, Cora Meirelles Story 2 by Christina Jody Martins.
Get back here, nerd.
It was a hot afternoon, the early days back to school after the summer break, before Cora Meirelles knew more than one or two neighborhoods in her own universe. Cora ran through the streets of her ghetto, tears streaming down her face, with a cockroach or two hanging from her jacket despite her frantic efforts to swat them away. She was absolutely certain that the three boys who had tormented her at the school gate would chase her down the street with more insults and roaches, and she dared not stop. She ran without conviction because gym class had taught her that her sincere efforts would not be enough. She was the slowest runner in her class, certainly slower than Dennis, Georgie, and Igor. She wouldn't be able to run all the way through the winding streets to get home. What moved her feet was the need for things to be different this time, and by running, at least she had a chance. As she turned the corner, panicked and hopeless, the vacant lot she passed by every week suddenly seemed like a good hiding place. She had never jumped over a wall in her life, but necessity made her learn fast. She placed her feet in the gaps, trusting an instinct she didn't know she had, and hoisted herself over to the other side, seeking refuge in the patchy tall grass. Her arms gave out, unable to hold her weight on the way down, and the cuff of her pants caught on a rock in the tall grass during the fall. Cora hid behind the crumbling wall, barely daring to breathe, crying silently and alone. She cried for so long that she couldn't even be sure the boys were gone. No one came looking for her, and she didn't want to return to the real life on the other side of the wall. She remained chained in place by debilitating doubts and half-truths, unable to distinguish them from the facts. It wasn't her first new school, let alone the first time she'd ended up in a situation like this. Other kids didn't like her very much, and Cora didn't really know how to make friends. The only people who spent time with her were made of paper and ink. And adults were utterly useless. The only heroes that existed were fictional. The quality of light that filtered through the gaps between her fingers changed suddenly with a caress of static. When she dared to look up, the first thing she saw were the stars, shining in a deep night that should have been the midday sun of an early after-school afternoon. The constellations blinked at her, friendly and more numerous than she had ever seen them looking up at the sky from her city. It was as if they knew they were sharing a secret with the girl and had all decided to make an appearance. Cora put her hands on the ground to stand up and realized that the grass was much softer than that in the vacant lot. The trees that adorned the distance in a small grove were of a type that she had only seen in children's books. It was looking at them that she realized she wasn't alone. A boy was watching her, his freckled face illuminated by a light at the end of a staff, his expression part amazement, part admiration. He stared at her as if she were more interesting and brighter than all the stars in the sky. The girl tried to say something, but before either of them could break the silence, Cora was no longer there. A hallway stretched out before her, metallic and intimidating. To the right, a huge window sprawled across the wall, lighting up the room with an alien glow. The light came from brittle and melancholy shapes that spiraled in a dark sky, breaking and joining together in random patterns. They seemed fragile and sad and a little bit dangerous. She watched them, hypnotized, until, following the railing with her gaze, she noticed a partially open door at the end of the hallway. The door was like something someone would find on a submarine, keeping the water on the right side and saving the passengers from drowning in the flood, or in a bank, preventing a thief from stealing the contents of a vault. Cora passed through it cautiously. There was no one on the other side, just a metal box, abandoned on a work table, surrounded by unfinished drafts of incomprehensible ideas. The box reminded the girl of a puzzle, like the Rubik's Cube she had received as a child and unsuccessfully tried to solve until her sister had thrown it on the ground and she had seen how the pieces fit together. Cora lost track of how long she was lost in schematics full of concepts she couldn't understand and notes about things she didn't know were possible. At some point, she realized she was dealing with a machine that could travel between universes. But what had happened to her? Was she now in another universe? She reached out toward the metal box. As she did, the hatch behind her opened and, abandoning the papers, Cora turned to look. Before she could see to whom the strange corridor belonged, she found herself back in the vacant lot. Months later, the day Cora saved Erie. Artie, Med and Morrow are examining Cora and her technology to calm Jane and Tam's suspicions. In the medical wing aboard what remained of the small scientific vessel, the Compass, Cora found herself very far from home. Morrow, the resident enigma-solving handy person, examined Cora's cardboard box with curiosity. Her blue skin glinted under the red emergency lights, and small, thoughtful bubbles formed on the liquid of the respirator around her gills. However, she wore a calm, if slightly puzzled, look.
"And you came up with this?"
Morrow asked incredulously.
"And you did all that stuff you said you did, rescuing crew members and putting them in another galaxy, with that?"
Morrow turned the object over in her hands. The tangle of wires was completely different from any other technology she had ever encountered before. The box didn't seem to be more than a remote control, but what it controlled, Morrow couldn't understand. It certainly wasn't a bomb. The alien glanced at the girl out of the corner of her eye, her protective glasses helping to hide the movement. Cora herself seemed almost as interesting to her as the object, and this impression only grew stronger the longer she spoke to the girl. Morrow had never seen a human child before Cora. There were none in the crew. Cora looked much like other humans, but at the same time was completely different. She wore her long brown hair in a braided ponytail, and her dark, curious eyes searched Morrow's face eagerly. Her blue and white uniform made her stand out among the red and black of the Compass. She was a bit more cute, less hardened by time. There was an excitement in her features that was not present in the faces of the older humans. Cora was the girl who had a purpose, who looked at the universe as if it were a new thing, who had a place to go back to, who seemed afraid of being stuck there, and with good reason. Morrow hugged the box thoughtfully and mentally prepared to examine it further when Cora called her back and handed her a bunch of crumpled drawings on some kind of organic material.
"I have a crazy plan, and I need a second opinion,"
she said. Morrow's eyes widened, intrigued, her substitute for raising eyebrows she didn't have. She had some difficulty deciphering human scribbles and perhaps stayed silent for too long because Cora added, nervously twisting her pale hands.
"The idea is to sacrifice non-essential parts of the compass in favor of stronger shields. The shields would be smaller but more powerful, fueled by the heart of gold itself."
Morrow scrutinized the diagrams, still not quite sure, and finally offered,
"We would be protected for a while inside the nebula. A neutral political zone, too hot for most ships on the border, would hide us from the Aka and the Gatula if they came to destroy the campus."
Finally, her blue face twisted in enthusiasm.
"It's a very good idea, actually. Did you come up with this on your own?"
Cora's cheeks flushed with the compliment.
"Time travel. Sort of,"
she clarified.
"So most of the idea is yours, actually."
Cora shrugged in a gesture that was probably intended to be casual, but ended up being shy and awkward.
"It could work,"
Morrow said slowly.
"Very well, actually, if we made good use of what's left of the engineering crew, but we'd practically need a new engine. The campus doesn't exactly have spare parts lying around."
"I can help with that,"
offered the girl, jumping off the medical table where she had been sitting.
"Just tell me what you need and I can go get it for you. I can go back and forth in a flash."
The young girl pointed to her time-traveling box emphatically. Morrow widened her eyes in understanding.
"My technology is your technology,"
Cora said, as if they were exchanging a secret.
"After all, it's dangerous for you out here."
Months after the tear and days after the Compass rescued Erie, Cora was sitting in a chair in her hometown in Brazil, analyzing for the umpteenth time the notes and drawings she had made in the corner of her notebook, her plan with Morrow. Officially, she was attending a geography class, but for weeks school had been nothing but white noise. The dark circles under her young eyes gave away every night she had slept poorly, afraid of not being able to return to the Compass. Cora had an irrational and persistent certainty that something was going to go wrong. She impatiently checked again what parts she was missing, without having the slightest idea where to start. Where was a middle schooler supposed to get a spaceship engine? Maybe she wouldn't be able to get all the parts she needed. Or maybe she wouldn't be able to make the tear take her back to the exact place and time. Maybe she would end up fried and frozen in the vacuum of space alongside the corpses of the crew of the ship she was trying to help. Or, her worst fear, maybe the tear would close forever while she was away, and she would be trapped in the present, thinking she had imagined the whole thing. A paper ball hit the top of her head, catapulting her out of her anxious stupor. Seconds later, another one whizzed past her right shoulder, ricocheting off the wall and landing inconveniently on her page. Cora swept them away, feigning indifference, and they joined the others innocuously on the floor, a waste of a good notebook that, fortunately, wasn't hers. They were piling up around her, and she looked at them with a resigned sigh. She cast an exasperated glance at the shooters, Dennis and his friends, Georgie and Igor, who had armed themselves with innocent and angelic expressions of those who are clearly guilty, and then another at Miss Raymunda, who seemed to be deliberately ignoring the situation just as much as the young woman had ignored her explanation minutes before. Cora shrugged. She was already used to it. She nudged Carla, who was sitting in the desk in front of her.
Hey, Carla,
She whispered. Carla hummed in question, leaning back to hear her better.
do you mind lowering your head a bit? Their aim has improved, but it's still raining paper balls over here.
The taller girl gave her a curious look over her shoulder and then nestled her head in her arms, bent over her desk. Cora murmured in gratitude and rummaged through her bag. After finding what she was looking for, she opened the umbrella. It was small and pink, completely conspicuous in the room. The paper projectiles bounced off the fabric and wire fortress, missing their targets with a funny noise. Satisfied, Cora resumed her work as if nothing had happened.
Cora,
Miss Raymunda called after a few moments. With a sigh and an impatient gesture,
Yes, teacher.
the girl asked, reluctantly meeting her gaze. Miss Raymunda and she were already an old and unhappy case of predestined antipathy. The laughter of her classmates came into focus, standing out from the white noise.
why do you have an open umbrella, Cora?
The adult asked with a tired gesture. Cora thought for a moment and then answered, hesitantly.
I concentrate better with it open, teacher.
Miss Raymunda blinked, stunned for a moment, and then continued her questioning in a conversational tone, giving in.
Oh. And why isn't your textbook open, then?
I'm waiting for the exercises to be corrected, teacher. The book is open under the desk.
We're going over the explanation of another chapter now.
The irritable teacher said.
We're no longer working on exercises.
Yes, I know. We've finished chapter 10 on the consequences of globalization. I'm waiting for the exercises from chapter 11 on Brazilian water basins,
She said, holding up her notebook to show the completed exercises.
I have a question, and you told us not to ask questions before you've finished explaining the material.
Raymunda nodded, exasperated. She hated it when Cora skipped ahead, but there was nothing in the rules that she could use to stop it, except appealing to common courtesy.
And do you need to do it with an open umbrella? You're disrupting the class.
The girl shot disinterested looks to her classmates, who suddenly, as if to make her life difficult, had all turned to stare at her. She doubted they would pay any more attention with or without her there.
I won't make noise, teacher.
Cora responded defensively, being careful not to sound aggressive.
If you really want me to, I'll close it, but I'll have to think of something else. Look, I have a problem.
Interrupting herself deliberately, Cora picked up a small paper ball from the floor and threw it in the direction of the teacher, making sure to miss her by a safe margin. Raymunda, who seemed to notice the projectiles for the first time, let out the exhausted sigh of someone who had to deal with this kind of thing every day.
Boys, let's stop this, okay?
She said, looking at the troublemakers. It was a small class and the culprits were always obvious and recurring.
And Cora, you can close your umbrella.
Cora obeyed and order was restored to the classroom. About 15 minutes later, when the teacher began to explain the exploitation of the Guarani aquifer, the bombardment of paper balls resumed and persisted until the loud bell marked the end of the school day. In the end, it was just another geography class and, invisible or not, she would survive.
Cora.
Miss Raymunda called after class.
A word, please.
Cora's shoulders tensed. Carla gave her a sympathetic look before leaving, and the class slowly emptied out behind her. Cora slumped in a defeated posture.
Did I do something wrong, teacher?
Raymunda sighed and pinched the bridge of her nose, giving the student a tired look.
We've talked about this, Cora. You don't pay attention, and you disturb the class.
My grades are good.
Cora grumbled, looking at the ground.
I know they are,
said Raymunda.
and if you didn't distract the rest of the class, everything would be fine. If they see that you're not working, they don't want to work either.
If that were true, teacher, everyone would have their homework done already. And I know they don't.
Earlier that day she had to tell Dennis she wouldn't let him copy her homework. Her juice for the break had then mysteriously disappeared while she wasn't looking. Raymunda clenched her teeth and changed her approach.
Look, Cora, you're a very smart girl. You really are. But you'd do better in life if you learn to work in a group. It's not wrong to ask for help when you need it, and I'd like you to see me as an ally, not an enemy.
Cora nodded automatically. She recognized the speech as a mixture of, "You would have more friends if you tried harder," and "You can count on me." She translated it as, "I don't really care about you and your problems, and I have no intention of helping, but the institution I work for requires me to offer help as a courtesy." Recommended course of action: smile and wave.
Of course, teacher. Can I go now?
Every minute she spent in that room was a minute she spent away from the tear. It might not make a difference to the compass, but it made a difference to her. Raymunda reluctantly consented and accompanied her to the door.
Try to fit in better, Cora. I'm sure you'll succeed if you make an effort.
Cora disappeared down the corridor without responding. Carla was waiting for her as soon as she turned the first corner. She was Cora's only friend in the entire school, a tall girl with rolled-up sleeves to show off muscular arms, curly hair slightly bleached by the sun, and long red nails sharp enough to serve as a weapon if necessary.
"Hey, Cora.
She greeted, walking beside her.
Did you see the floor as the class was ending? So clean you could eat off it."
At least they care about the cleaning lady.
Cora noted dismally, then narrowed her eyes, suspicious.
Or it could be just efficient evidence disposal.
Carla agreed with a scoff.
"I think it's more the latter,"
she said, and reached out an arm to stop Cora from stumbling to the ground.
"Anyway, I still have to give you back the book you lent me. With a few more bricks like these, you could build a house."
Carla pulled a battered copy out of her backpack. It was a thick book covered in greasy finger marks, with a cover peeling from use that must have weighed at least 5 pounds. The title read The Blackwood Sisters and the Cursed Amulet. She firmly placed it in her friend's hands.
"I wouldn't want to stop you from reading it for the 100th time or something,"
Carla said with a laugh as Cora unsuccessfully tried to fit one more book into her half-open backpack.
37th time. And I have a pocket-sized copy in the original language. You never know when knowing other languages might come in handy,
Cora replied with a smile.
So, what did you think? It's really good, isn't it?
"You show-off nerd."
Carla retorted, laughing and putting her arm around her friend's shoulder as the two squeezed through the school gate into the crowd of kids and parents outside.
"It's really damn good. Man, that cursed amulet is going to be so much trouble. Poor Andrew, though."
Cora's open backpack leaned forward, threatening to spill its contents onto the ground. She awkwardly hugged it, avoiding disaster, and finally opted to zip it up without putting the book inside. Her mouth stretched into a new smile as she reconstructed in her mind the moment when Rowan Blackwood, the protagonist, cast her first spell and accidentally hit Andrew Trent while the boy was watching her from above the neighboring garden hedge.
I can bring the next book tomorrow,
she offered, adjusting the one under her arm.
You better read it soon, or I can't guarantee I won't accidentally spoil it for you.
You're such a jerk, Cora,
yelled Dennis, snatching the copy of the Blackwood Sisters and tossing it to Igor.
Catch.
Igor, a tall boy with a face marked by pimples, pulled the book out of the air by its flaps, and the sound of pages being crumpled hit Cora harder than a punch to the face.
Oh, come on. Give it back,
she yelled, stepping away from Carla and launching herself towards the book. Igor laughed until he ran out of breath while Cora made a pathetic attempt to climb him. Georgie, a smiling boy with big ears and nimble fingers, took advantage of the new positioning to open the girl's backpack and steal one of her notebooks.
What the hell is this, man? The next chapter in the math lesson?
He asked, opening the notebook to a page full of formulas and diagrams. Cora's face turned white, and Carla pulled her back by the backpack as they watched the notebook land in Dennis' hands.
Give it back.
Cora repeated, a little more desperate this time.
Please.
Dennis, his freckles hidden under the brim of his snapback hat, looked at her with one eyebrow raised.
What? This?
He said, looking at the diagram.
I think I'll keep it so we can study for today's homework.
That's not the math homework. Dennis, we're still in front of the school. If you don't give it back to me, I'll...
protested Cora, but before she could think of a threat, Carla clicked her tongue impatiently and marched firmly to Igor, snatching the Blackwood sisters from his hand effortlessly. She then turned on her heels to face Dennis, easily imposing herself over him with her prodigious height.
Give that thing back now, we all have better things to do,
she demanded.
Get lost, nobody asked you, windshield face.
He retorted.
You're not dumber for lack of opportunity.
Carla turned red and cracked her knuckles.
Think very highly of yourself, do you? At least I don't cheat to pass tests, unlike you, who if you were any dumber would make the Guinness Book. No, you know what? I actually think the person who slips you the answers is an even bigger dingus. Truly an impressive feat,
she said, giving a significant look to Igor.
If I were one of your parents, I'd be having a divorce too, just out of sheer embarrassment.
Dennis blushed from the start of his neck to the tips of his ears, his entire face camouflaging under his red hair, and lowered the notebook. He approached Carla until his freckled face was practically glued to hers, despite his short stature, and cracked his knuckles.
Dennis, look, here comes your mom.
Cora suddenly shouted, pointing to some point behind the red-headed boy. Dennis and his friends turned to look, and she took advantage of the situation to snatch the notebook from his weak grip. Dennis would have been even more annoyed if it weren't for the fact that his mom was actually coming up the street. In an instant, the trio had rearranged themselves, and their faces were molded into truly angelic expressions. Dennis's mother, a hard-working woman who was surprisingly young, was one of the kindest people Cora had ever met, unlike her son. Cora forgot her name half the time, in one of those situations where it was no longer polite to ask due to the length of time they had known each other. In her mind, she was Dennis's mother, but every time Cora saw her, she considered how unfair that was. The woman was amazing but had been stuck in an unhappy marriage for years in an attempt to maintain some family structure for her son. Dennis's mother worked double shifts to help pay for her son's schooling and household bills. Cora had great respect for the woman, and yet, as Dennis's mother, was preceded in her mind by all the times her son had made an effort to make Cora's life a little worse. The girl thought it was a shame that the woman was not more of a presence in her son's life, and this was one of the only points she suspected she and the redhead had in common.
Hi, kids.
Dennis's mother greeted as soon as her eyes landed on the forced smiles of the group.
Not up to mischief, I hope.
Her gaze scanned the row of faces and settled on Cora, suspiciously. Years of constant incidents and frequent calls from the school's administration made the existing antagonism between the children unquestionable. As Cora was the well-behaved nerd, her physical proximity to her son indicated a crime scene for which the others would need to be disciplined. The girl waved uncomfortably, trying to close her backpack zipper, from which her things threatened to fall out.
Mom.
Dennis complained.
Why did you come to pick me up at the school gate? I thought we talked about this.
Dennis's mother molded her face into an expression as innocent and solemn as her son's, the corners of her eyes betraying her amusement. Dennis was as red as a tomato. Igor, Georgie, and Carla wouldn't dare tease him in front of his mother, but they all knew he wouldn't hear the end of the jokes later.
I start work later today, so I thought I could take my son out for lunch,
she replied, smiling.
I'm sorry if you find your mother embarrassing. I'm not embarrassed by my son. Everything okay there, Cora?
Cora, who had finally managed to cram all her things into her backpack and was trying to discreetly leave with Carla, let out a startled squeak.
Everything is okay, yes,
she said, her voice slightly shrill.
I was just a little frazzled here, but we were already leaving.
Yup,
Carla interjected, pulling down the sleeves of her uniform with a surly expression. Dennis's mother thought she was a bad influence, and Carla, in turn, reserved the right to do as she pleased without having to account to adults who might rat her out to her mother.
We're running late, Cora. We both have things to do.
Oh, studying hard?
The grown-up asked, her smile fading a bit as she addressed Carla.
Organizing a new project.
Cora squeaked.
We only stopped to discuss math homework.
Carla took her friend's hand and began pulling her down the street. The longer they stayed there, the more trouble they would be in. Cora was a terrible liar.
Maybe you could study together sometime,
the older woman called after them.
These boys could use your good influence.
Maybe another day.
Carla replied over her shoulder, picking up the pace into a run. Cora followed her, stumbling. She wasn't used to running, and her backpack was always excessively heavy. The girls turned a few corners, headed for their homes, and only stopped when they arrived at a vacant lot hidden from view by a corner house. Cora leaned against the wall, panting. Her throat hurt from breathing with her mouth open, and her knees trembled. Carla huffed, angry.
The day I voluntarily go to one of their houses to study, the devil will win the Winter Olympics.
Ooh, I hope I'm a medalist in figure skating.
A hoarse voice replied from behind the girls.
Oscar!
Carla shouted, reflexively slapping him in the middle of his chest. Oscar grimaced in pain, and Carla laughed.
Ow, woman!
He complained.
You deserved it for sneaking up on us like that, you dummy,
Carla said, approaching him for a kiss. Cora adjusted her backpack on her shoulders, uncomfortable, and focused on inspecting a crack in the wall. Oscar was a skinny boy, tufts of beard threatening to sprout from his bony chin, feet clad in expensive sneakers, Carla's current boyfriend. She was changing them quite frequently, which was earning her a bad reputation among the more conservative residents of the neighborhood. But Carla didn't care. She had developed an affinity for motorbikes, and that was how she chose her boys.
Ready to ride?
He asked, pointing to his motorbike across the street.
No time like the present,
replied Carla, smiling. And then, looking over her shoulder as if she had a sudden thought, she asked,
Are you going to be okay here, Cora?
Of course,
Cora replied, although her voice lacked conviction. When Carla and Oscar met, it was usually up to Cora to avoid her friend's mother's questions. Hey, everyone does what they want, right? As long as it was taken into account, of course, that Cora was really bad at lying convincingly, Carla got on the bike behind Oscar, hugging him around the waist. He was too young to legally drive, and neither of them had helmets on, but Cora limited herself to express her disapproval with a frown. Carla, who had made it abundantly clear in previous situations what she thought of her friend's interference, pretended not to notice it. With a kick from Oscar, the engine roared to life.
See you later, brains,
he said, laughing and waving his head in Cora's direction. The two disappeared from view, wheeling the bike down the street. Cora bit her lip and, turning to face the empty lot, tried to get her friend out of her thoughts. In the end, she supposed that Carla had her secrets, and she had hers. She hadn't lied to Dennis's mother. She was working on a new project. Cora quickly scanned the surroundings. She supposed that one of the advantages of living in peripheral areas of a Brazilian city was how empty the streets could be during business hours, especially in the most remote areas, far from the neighborhood shops. Nobody cared what you were doing, not even the police, because it almost never ended up on television or under a media spotlight. Ignoring the sign that said not to, she threw her backpack over the wall, hoisted herself up with difficulty, and then cautiously launched herself over the divider, landing awkwardly on the tall grass. The air there vibrated with an undefinable electric quality, and Cora looked toward the center of the lot as if she could see something beyond the neglected vegetation and debris. Occasionally, if she looked closely, she could see stars shining in impossible places through the blue sky. Hidden in that vacant lot, invisible to passers-by, was the anomaly that Cora used to travel through the universes. She had discovered it by chance. She had returned here after school every day since then and built her box. The machine allowed her a small spark of control. Now she could travel whenever she wanted instead of having to wait for the anomaly's goodwill. In all other aspects, the tear reminded her a bit of the sea in its temperament. It brought her pieces, like the tide would bring debris to the sands of a beach. Knowledge emerged in her mind. She couldn't control where she went unless the machine was activated, but she knew the tear would always bring her back. Here was her island. The girl opened her backpack and pulled out the schematics that Georgie had thought was math homework. For a horrible moment, she feared that Dennis would destroy them, but there they were. Thanking her good fortune, she rolled up her sleeves and began to eagerly search through the bushes of soft grass and wild shrubs. The tear had not lost its habit of regurgitating useful pieces and trinkets. Perhaps she would be lucky. Sometimes Cora wondered where those things came from. From which universe or scattered future they had come and how they ended up in that vacant lot, among the common discards and debris of the 21st century. Sometimes she wondered how she knew what they were, or even where her ideas came from to dismantle them and transform them into things they were never created to be in the first place. The practical functioning of the tear itself seemed much easier to master than the theoretical. Cora could go where she wanted as long as she accepted the puzzles of her ignorance and let the tear lead. However, embracing her limitations meant admitting to having no idea how the anomaly worked, how it had opened, or whether it would ever close and leave her behind. A few meters ahead, the engine she was building for Morrow stretched out on the grass, in unfinished pieces. She had been doing many things lately that left her feeling confused and ignorant, and this was just the newest on the list. The directions from the blue alien were the only indication she had of her progress. She was groping in the dark, exploring laws of nature that didn't really exist in her universe and, that until a few months ago, she would have considered fictional. It had been a week for her since she had last seen the crew, and although she had continued to live her life as an ordinary girl of the 21st century, she hadn't stopped thinking about them for a second. They were her guarantee, but they had become her mission. She continued to rummage through the foliage, resigned, with a heavy heart. After another half an hour of unsuccessful searching, Cora began to consider that maybe this wasn't the best solution to the problem. Maybe the anomaly wasn't going to bring her what she needed this time. She hadn't found anything in the last 3 days. And there was no guarantee that she would find anything that day either. And then another weekend would come, and she wouldn't have an excuse to come to the anomaly for 2 whole days. Maybe she had to be more proactive.
What do you think, Ho? Do I have to go to the source this time?
The girl asked the anomaly, wiping the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. The truth was that Cora didn't really know where to get the material for the engine. She couldn't just go back to the compass and ask, not without creating a paradox around herself. And the compass had improvised so much technology in their adventures that not just any part from the human colonies would do. In the end, she didn't mind having to find solutions on her own, but wouldn't it be great if she had someone to ask? With a sudden idea, Cora jumped up, grabbed her cardboard box and her semi-built engine pieces, and raced towards the center of the field, where she disappeared through the anomaly in the universe. In the Earth of a parallel universe, Tommy, one of the compass engineers, stared, confused and irritated, at the teenager who had somehow managed to turn her life upside down for the second time in an excessively short period of time. Her black eyes examined the girl's features tempestuously, her short nails digging at the equipment in her hands.
And do you expect me to help with the adaptation of a converter for the compass? From what? This meager piece of metal.
Cora fiddled with the straps of her backpack absent-mindedly. The likelihood of finding any of the survivors from the compass or the Valiant on a planet as huge as Earth under normal conditions was infinitesimal. With the anomaly, she could have bumped into any one of the dozens of people she had pulled from the 2 ships. She supposed she was lucky to have found someone with specific knowledge of the engine room. Tommy had been looking directly at her when she materialized exactly on the terrace of the same futuristic building where she had left her, seemingly with a 2-month difference.
I don't have the knowledge to make the adaptations myself,
Cora reluctantly confessed.
You've worked on the compass, you know what the equipment there looks like.
Very well, but if you do want to know what the compass's fitting looks like, why don't you go ask the compass?
Tommy asked.
I left the compass in the middle of a crisis. There's no time to build everything there. It has to be ready to run when I get back.
Tommy shook her head, incredulous.
I was under the impression that the plan entailed not getting directly involved and abstaining from tampering with the course of history.
They saved Erie before I could,
Cora explained, ashamed.
That changes things. He's still there.
And I suppose you have no intention of letting me go there and assist in person,
Tomi retorted, her eyes sparkling. Cora sighed and hid her face in her hands.
Don't do this to me, miss.
She pleaded with a muffled voice.
Look, I'm not a mystical entity of infinite power. I'm a girl with a cardboard box who could learn a thing or two from you about traveling through the universe with precarious equipment, and you need to be aware of that. You also need to know that everything I change increases the risk of impacting a future that, to be honest, was looking pretty good before I arrived. I don't even know what happens if I cause a bigger paradox. Right now I'm just trying to make things a little better than I found them.
A sad expression crossed Tomi's face, an angry arch in her eyebrow, and for a moment Cora thought she was going to say something. The former crew member merely shook her head. After a few moments, she said,
Give me that thing. Let us see what we can do.
Cora handed the device to Tomi, and she examined it quickly.
It is a good idea, but this connector will never fit. We shall have to build another one. I will take this.
Tomi patted the engine and hugged it protectively.
Why?
Cora asked, confused.
I will assemble the crew members you said you have brought here,
Tomi said, testing the weight of the engine.
Do not take offense, but I prefer to collaborate with individuals who know what they are doing.
Cora nodded.
All right. What day is it today?
Why do you ask?
This needs to be done before the date the compass was supposed to arrive. To know how much time we have, I need to know what day it is today.
Tomi sighed and gave her a date. Cora absorbed the information. 6 months, then. She communicated the deadline to the older woman. Tomi made a face.
You know, considering your evident concern for temporal disturbances, you do a rather dismal job at keeping yourself away from trouble. Procure for me an engine from the commercial mezzanine of the spacebound colony, something portable and versatile. Meet me at this very location in a week.
Tomi pulled a small black disc from her pocket and handed it to the girl.
Use this as payment. It is a superior source of energy than those the spacebound colony used to have, and it is new technology. It should be worth something.
Cora thought about protesting but took the disc anyway and began to make her way back home. She was already heading towards the tear when the older woman called out to her.
Cora!
The girl turned to look at her with a curious expression.
Please just bring the compass back unscathed, okay?
I will.
She replied, her expression determined. Cora lifted the now empty backpack onto her shoulders and cast a last glance at her scattered notebooks on the ground. She had a feeling she would need the space in her bag to carry the engine back home. She stowed the battery Tomi had given her in one of her pockets and tucked the box under her arm. The anomaly opened discreetly, semi-visible in the middle of the lot, only so Cora could be sure she wouldn't end up in space. Through the portal, she could see faint figures moving, as if the people on the other side were made of smoke. Summoning her courage, she took a step forward. She was in her neighborhood when she lifted her feet off the ground. When she put them back down, she was in one of the most discreet alleys in the heart of the space-bound colony. Observing the movement, she entered the flow. Legs, wheels, and various appendages went by and made open sky, the winged capital of that civilization, more like a bustling city than a space station. The colony, although suffering from its fragile political alliances, had been, before the fall, a place of exchange, interchange, and diversity. Cora would go unnoticed there. On the mezzanine above her head, faces blended in the coming and going, some human, others alien. She mentally reviewed the species she could name: the Zargan, the Aka, the Saurians. Not all humanoid, and almost none sincere allies of their hosts, the lights in that part of open sky shone constantly, like a sun, and Cora, more adept at twilight, fought the instinct to cover her eyes with her hand. The night was not profitable in those hangars, and anyone who felt the need to sleep could just as well leave them for another's use in the meantime. Winding through the crowded streets, between vendors jostling in disreputable agreements and small, run-down shops of assorted materials, Cora saw her target. A bell rang as she entered the small workshop, and the place seemed terribly dusty despite the constant stream of people outside.
Hello?
Called the girl.
Just a moment,
Came the response from the back. Cora approached the objects on display, her curious eyes scanning the shelves. The objects swarmed from the stands and walls, stacks of small atomic reactors that would fit in her uniform pocket, portable energy matter converters, artificial gravity generators the size of her backpack. The workshops on the other side of the citadel would have the same equipment on larger scales, immense generators capable of supplying entire city ships, artificial gravity devices in casings the size of a building. But not this one. The most efficient equipment your small transport ship can carry. It may not be a catchy slogan, but the concept would serve her perfectly in her time of need.
hello. How can I help?
Asked the clerk, finally approaching Cora. Cora looked at him for a moment. He was a man in his mid-30s, with curly hair that started to show a bald spot, skinny as a stick, and with a friendly but tired smile. His name tag read Daniel. She felt a sad tug at her heart, but couldn't identify the cause. She filed the feeling for later inspection.
Could you tell me about that engine over there, sir?
She asked, pointing to the piece she wanted, an engine marked as a mixed nuclear fusion and electron propulsion, slightly larger than her backpack. Daniel inspected her, as if measuring her knowledge.
Well, it's a portable adaptation. It can handle a small ship without much trouble, and you gain a lot of space,
He said.
I can see that.
Cora said amiably.
That's why I want it. I meant the nuclear fusion and electron propulsion thing. It's not very common to see a hybrid one, is it? The ships I know usually have either one or the other. What's the performance of it like?
Maybe you ain't familiar with enough ships, then, young lady.
The store clerk retorted with a smile. He winked conspiratorially, as if he were going to tell her a secret.
Look, it all depends on where you're going, right? Some of our neighbors got electron propulsion, some got fusion propulsion, so if you fancy visiting both in one day, any fuel will do the trick.
Wow, visiting both on the same day. It's good to know I have that option,
Cora said, laughing.
But what's the catch? You're avoiding the subject. Why aren't there lines as long as the hangar to get one of these?
Daniel opened his arms with his palms up, his shoulders hunched in a gesture of surrender.
Hey, you got me,
he said, still smiling. He pointed to a part on the device.
With the size reduction, something had to go, right? What's the performance like, you said? Dispendious, I reply. It's for quick trips over a long interval because the cooler wasn't made for crossing the galaxy. Ships that can afford to have a whole room for the engine usually prefer something more traditional but less flexible. Believe me, this is the best engine for a small ship, Captain.
He patted the equipment proudly, and Cora looked at him thoughtfully.
Recharge time, the great evil of the impromptu traveler, isn't it?
She said to herself, absent-mindedly touching the backpack strap.
Tell me, do you think it's possible to adapt your genius invention for a small planetary scientific ship?
Daniel, who until then had been tremendously cordial and receptive, closed his expression in rapid successions of surprise and disgust, and adopted a rigid posture, his arms crossing over his chest. He turned his back on her and began to frantically tidy up the parts on the other side of the counter.
Planetary ships don't need to travel outside the system. I don't know where you got that awful idea from,
he said, his voice trembling with an undefined emotion.
Maybe you should look in another store, but I don't think you'll find one willing to serve the likes of you anywhere in the hangar. We only have honest people here, unlike the planetary colony.
Cora's smile faded, and she raised her hands in a defensive gesture.
Slow down there, dude, I'm just speaking hypothetically.
I don't care,
he interrupted abruptly, turning to face her, his thin jaw snapping.
If you've stolen, or if you're going to steal a ship, or if you're going to make a schematic and leave it in a drawer for the next century, I don't care, just don't include me. You look better fed than the orphans here in the hangar, maybe you even have a family. If you're smart, you'll get out of this while you still can.
The clerk glared at the girl ominously over the counter, and Cora instinctively shrunk back, adjusting her backpack on her shoulders. She had never received this kind of look before, the kind of contempt that a juvenile delinquent, any little thief, receives. She looked back, not quite understanding the meaning of the hostility, swallowed hard, and remained rooted to the spot, shocked.
What you waiting for? Get out of here. Leave my shop, girl, I don't want to see you here again,
he said. As Cora still hesitated, he came around the counter and firmly grabbed her by the arm, opened the door, and threw her out of his shop. Cora stumbled into one of the passers-by and was knocked to the ground. She cushioned the fall with empty hands on the merciless metal and turned to face the equipment shop owner, but he had already gone inside. Behind her there was only a closed door. She made her way back to the alley, trying not to cry, trying not to antagonize someone she would probably never see again. It was only when she was back home in the vacant lot, still confused, her cheeks burning in humiliation, that Cora realized, with a sudden shock of anguish and dysphoria, that she had been talking to someone who had probably died in the colony attack. Someone who was on open sky as the anomaly torn the star system apart and the aliens of the galaxy came to finish the job the weird tentacled thing that replaced their star couldn't. Blood suddenly warmed her face, and her skin tingled in response. Numb fingers let the cardboard box fall to the ground, tears burned watery trails on the young face.
Why did you take me there?
She raged, turning to face the invisible tear.
He didn't sell me the machine, there was no one to help me. Why did you take me there? Was it for me to be harassed by a guy who literally has no future? Because there's already enough of that out here.
The tear, of course, didn't answer. It remained invisible and mute. Cora wasn't even sure if the anomaly had a consciousness or could understand how angry and distressed she was at that moment. But she decided she didn't care. She threw her backpack towards the tear and watched it land, harmless, a few meters away, as if there was nothing present in that piece of air. Cora's short and chewed nails dug crescents into her empty palms as she rummaged around the ground to find all her notebooks. She hid her box from herself, pushing it into a rusty can, and then, without looking back, put as much distance as possible between herself and the tear, running away in large steps. On Friday afternoon, Arlindo rolled up the sleeves of his worn shirt and adjusted his huge glasses with a tired sigh, staring at the puzzle in front of him. It was a sort of ritual they had. Grandpa Arlindo had been unable to help his granddaughter with homework for years, yet every afternoon, he and Cora sat side by side at the kitchen table, she with her notebook, he with his crossword puzzles. The old man peered over the top of the magazine he was trying to solve, his glasses precariously perched on his nose. The girl had been looking with a despondent expression at the page in her notebook for the past 40 minutes, her brown hair escaping from her long braid at odd angles, as if she had tried to yank it out in frustration recently. Homework wasn't usually this hard, muttered Grandpa Arlindo thoughtfully.
A 9-letter word for unhappy. Starts with D, but depressed won't fit.
The old man ran his thin, white fingers through his hair, making it look as tousled as the girl's next to him.
I told you this magazine you bought me was too difficult for me, child.
Cora chuckled and lifted her gaze from her notebook to offer her grandfather a mischievous smile.
But if you don't challenge yourself, you won't build your vocabulary, Grandpa,
argued the young girl innocently, her black eyes sparkling with amusement.
Besides, you were finishing the newspaper crosswords too quickly. So we're both exercising our brains here every afternoon. Dysphoric.
The old man's face twisted into a wrinkled grimace, and he twirled his pencil between his fingers, displeased. Finally he protested.
You making up words now? That doesn't exist.
Yes, it does, Grandpa,
retorted Cora.
When you're happy, you're euphoric, and when you're sad, you're dysphoric. See? It fits perfectly here, look.
The girl leaned over and scribbled the word in the designated space. Grandpa Arlindo brushed off the lapel of his granddaughter's jacket. It was covered in dirt and dust.
You could take this off and give it for me to wash,
he suggested sternly.
If I didn't know you, I'd think you were rolling around on the ground.
Cora shrank back reflexively.
Your clothes are coming back torn too,
he noticed.
You're not hitching any rides with Carla's motorcycle boys, are you?
Cora's eyes widened, shocked.
Grandpa, no. What are you talking about?
Well, the whole church knows. We try not to mention it to her mother so she doesn't die of shame, but let's not change the subject. Is that why you've been coming back later than usual? Have you been sneaking off to see your boyfriend?
He reproached, taking off his glasses and letting them dangle on a cord around his neck.
Did you fight with him? Is that why you're sad?
What?
Cora exclaimed, laughing.
Fought with who, Grandpa? What boyfriend? Oh, come on. There's no boy.
She tried to stifle her laughter with the back of her hand, enjoying herself a little too much with her grandfather's suspicious expression.
Okay, no boyfriend.
Grandpa Arlindo conceded.
Then why are you sad, Cora?
Cora's genuine laughter dissolved into nervous laughter, and she closed her notebook, agitated.
I'm not sad, Grandpa,
protested the girl, unconvincingly.
Dysphoric, then?
Grandpa Arlindo joked.
It's the same thing. It's nothing, Grandpa.
Are you sure?
He inquired, fixing his granddaughter with brown eyes of the same shape as hers.
Watch it, child, don't lie to me. God is watching.
Cora shook her head with an affectionate smile.
I love you, Grandpa,
she said, leaning in to kiss the old man's cheek. And she did love him, but she didn't think Grandpa Arlindo would react well to the idea of tears in reality and spaceships in peril.
Do you really love me? I'll pretend to believe you,
he replied with a grouchy smile, watching his granddaughter grab her backpack and make her escape towards her room. On Saturday, Meirelles pulled back her gray hair to keep it out of her eyes and settled onto the couch, watching her sullen daughter over the popcorn bowl. Her father, Arlindo, had been right, something was off. Saturdays were science fiction days. Meirelles had grown used to it. Her eldest daughter, Celia, preferred concerts and bars, while Cora, her youngest, was more into books and TV shows. She supposed she should enjoy the company of her daughter while they still had something in common. That day, however, Cora seemed distant, unapproachable, strangely silent for someone who usually recited lines along with the characters. On the television screen, Captain Jane Skye and Erie were discussing a collection mission. They had watched this episode dozens of times.
This is the episode where they find a colony of slaves, isn't it?
Meirelles asked, casually grabbing some popcorn.
No, Mom. It's the episode where Erie died,
Cora corrected. The girl buried her face in her hands with a sigh, then made a motion to get up.
I don't think I'm in the mood to marathon today, Mom.
Okay, that's fine,
Meirelles comforted, a little surprised. Cora tended to be extremely systematic in her habits.
Is everything okay?
Cora evaded a direct answer.
I'm working on a project,
she said. Meirelles nodded. She was getting somewhere.
And how's it going?
The girl's mother gently inquired. Cora seemed to suddenly find the texture of the rug intriguing and absent-mindedly pulled on a strand of her brown hair in a nervous gesture.
I found the piece I needed, but I couldn't buy it from the guy.
The girl reluctantly admitted. Meirelles nodded.
Did you run out of money? I can cover the rest, if you want.
Cora shook her head.
He just didn't want to sell it, and I don't know where else to get one. I need that piece, or I'll have to give up on the plan and think of something else,
she confessed, her face adopting a decidedly miserable expression. Meirelles watched her daughter cautiously for a moment, her eyebrows furrowing together.
You know, sometimes you can get things used. You'd be surprised what people throw away. When I had a junkyard, all sorts of things ended up there, not all of it was bad.
For a minute there was no change in the girl's worried features, and then with a distinct moment of understanding, her face rearranged itself, and Cora seemed to perk up a little.
Yeah,
she said slowly, her expression molding into one of youthful determination.
I guess the junkyard thing could work. I think I'll visit one. Let Grandpa know I'll be home later on Monday. If it works, that's one less problem, right?
On Sunday, Cora balanced 2 sundaes to the most secluded table in the ice cream shop and deposited one of them in front of the skinny boy in the seat next to hers. As it was Sunday, her older sister's hobby had overtaken the house ostentatiously. Cora enjoyed rock music as much as any other teenager, but if she didn't want to hear the same songs endlessly, she knew she had to be out of the house during Celia's rehearsals. Kaio pushed his dark bangs away from his eyes without taking his gaze off his notebook. The Sunday thing had started as a joke.
Why is Sunday named after ice cream?
He had asked one afternoon while they did their English homework together, hunched over their notebooks on the steps of his house. Cora didn't know. With a little research, the two had discovered a confusing story, but it was supposed that at some point that type of ice cream was only sold on Sundays. It was kind of like the stories Kaio's grandmother, Dona Jerusa, told about only being allowed to drink soda on weekends when she was a kid. Kaio had had a lot of fun with the semi-fact.
Such a wrong idea, that. I don't eat Sundays on Sundays.
He had protested.
I eat chicken with farofa. I'm going to rename Sunday to give my lunch some publicity.
But it was the ice cream that got named after a weekday, Kyle, not the weekday that got named after ice cream.
Cora had retorted, smiling.
You'd have to rename your lunch to give your lunch some publicity.
Kaio had made a dismissive gesture.
Anyway, I think that's absurd,
he had said.
My Sundays taste like chicken with farofa, not ice cream.
But maybe,
Cora had conjectured, smiling conspiratorially.
If you had a Sunday every Sunday for a while, they would start to taste like ice cream to you. I don't think the problem is vocabulary, it's just that you're doing Sundays wrong.
And it was with that hypothesis in the air, in the best spirit of joking around, that they had dedicated themselves to convincing Dona Meirelles to fund this research. Cora's mother had relented with a defeated sigh and an amused smile on her lips. She had said that the least she expected was proper scientific methodology and guidelines. Kaio, who wasn't dumb, had even made some graphs considering the Sunday index of each Sunday based on the population sample that frequented the ice cream shop. He said that the data showed that Sundays were more Sunday-like in the summer, but that he wanted a few more Sundays to be sure. He wasn't one to miss out on a joke or a dessert.
So, how are we doing?
Asked Cora, poking her spoon into her sundae. Kaio shrugged and passed the notebook to her, finally shifting his focus to his own ice cream.
I don't know what we can do to fix this quest,
declared the boy, his mouth full of whipped cream. They had been working together on this indie game for months. It was an adventure RPG, one of those where the protagonist had to become a hero along the way. It might not have been the most original idea on the face of the earth, but they were going to make it happen and they were going to rock doing it. Kaio wanted to sell the game online when they were done, maybe enter it into a contest or two.
Why? What's wrong with the quest?
Asked Cora, failing to decipher her friend's scribbles.
It's the first big quest. I wanted to use it to show the player the map we're going to use for the rest of the game. The thing is, I don't know if it's working out that way. It seems like a cool idea, right? But then the player would have to walk the entire map to get to the dungeons, and then either they'll end up distracted by the smaller quests or frustrated because we blocked their progress.
Oh, it's the quest for the undefined mystic item that we want to use as a weapon.
Cora noted, disappointed. Kaio had been indecisive about what he wanted to use as a weapon.
Swords are so heroic, but axes are so badass. Oh, but spears are so cool.
After several sessions of changing their minds, Cora had jokingly suggested making a multi-use weapon that could change shape to encompass anything they could think of. She had regretted it immediately because Kaio had taken the idea seriously, and since she was in charge of the art, she was the one who had to draw the thing.
And the magic isn't even the problem this time. This thing is like a hydra, you solve one problem, two more sprout,
grumbled Kaio with his mouth full of chocolate. Cora sighed.
Well, if the magic isn't the problem this time, can't we use it to solve whatever the problem is? And what about if the wizard transports the character to the places they need to go?
Cora suggested after thinking for a bit, and then asked, interrupting herself.
By the way, have we decided what the guy's name is going to be?
We can just let the player choose,
lazily countered Kaio.
A bunch of RPGs do that. Something about immersion and putting yourself in the character's shoes.
And do those RPGs also let the player choose the title of the game? How are we doing on that front?
Cora asked. Kaio swallowed his spoonful of ice cream with a guilty expression and changed the subject.
So the wizard transports the player?
That would mean the character has no choice in where they go in this stage of the game. We don't run the risk of the player doing all the quests out of order,
observed Cora.
And if we limit the scope of the levels, we can present the dynamics of the game in a way that still leaves plenty for the player to see when they have to go through the places again.
That could become a little power that the character learns to use later on.
Kaio mused distractedly, the gears in his brain working at full speed, and his eyes lighting up with an excited gleam.
This opens up the possibility of sending the dude on several quests on opposite sides of the map.
We are geniuses.
Cora concluded.
And absolutely humble,
completed Kaio, laughing, leaning over to add the ideas to his notebook while Cora caught up on her almost untouched ice cream.
But wouldn't it be cool if life was like that? When I have no idea where to go or my goal is all the way over there, a wizard shows up, opens a portal, and bam, you're there.
Cora let out an uncomfortable laugh. She was starting to sympathize with her protagonist. It wasn't so fun when you were the one jumping into the portals without knowing where they were going to take you. Kaio, completely ignorant of her situation, continued to speak.
Or, actually, just being able to go somewhere interesting would be an improvement. Having an adventure to live, like, for real, instead of having to make one up, for a change.
Okay, Kaio, you're making me feel guilty now, she thought sourly. Cora had considered something like that in the last few weeks, that maybe Kaio would like to go on adventures with her. She hadn't intended to leave him out. It was just that she had spent so much time sitting in that vacant lot working on the mechanism alone. And after that, she had gotten tangled up in time travel problems and crew members on the brink of death. She just hadn't found a way to tell him yet. She wanted to do it right then, to make up for her mistake, but she stopped herself. She didn't think Kaio would believe such an absurd thing so easily. She would have to show him personally.
Hey, Kyle,
she called, taking his notebook to record an idea she had just had for the character design.
I wanted to show you something I found in a vacant lot near my school. Is that okay?
And what are you doing wandering around vacant lots, girl?
Kaio frowned, confused, as he peered at the drawing emerging on the page. It didn't seem like her thing. Cora was practically phobic about the hypothetical insects hidden in the tall grass. He himself wasn't very keen on the idea of coming home all dusty. His grandmother would wind up serving his liver for dinner and then yelling herself hoarse because she was the one who did the laundry. The pause between them stretched indecisively until, finally, the boy relented. The journey from the ice cream parlor to the vacant lot was not long, and the two had brought bicycles, which should make the trip even shorter. Cora watched Kaio contemplatively as she pedaled behind him. Everything, the school, the ice cream parlor, Kaio's house, the tear. None of these things were more than a few blocks away from each other. Her world was small without the compass. A drop of water hit her in the face, and she looked up to the gray sky above. The tear was her secret. She hadn't shared it with anyone. What if it didn't work when they got there? What if Kaio didn't believe her? What if the anomaly let them down, and they ended up in a bad place, like last time? She didn't know if she could trust the tear, so why was she showing it to someone else? Half the time she didn't even know why she liked traveling to other universes.
Is this it?
Kaio asked, surprised. The yellow sign warning her not to enter greeted her. Cora hadn't even noticed that they had stopped pedaling.
Yeah,
confirmed the girl, getting off her bike and securely chaining it to a post.
Do you think it's okay if we leave the bikes here?
Kaio asked. Cora suppressed an annoyed tisk.
You want to take a wheel from your bike with you to feel better? Come on. You're young, live a little.
Kaio stared at her as if she suddenly had tentacles sprouting from her face.
Okay,
he reluctantly said.
How do we get in?
He scrutinized the wall as if he were expecting to see a gate or something. Cora placed her feet on the worn supports with familiarity and perched on top of the wall. Kaio raised his eyebrows.
Okay, who are you?
He asked, trying to climb up the wall, unsuccessfully. His video game training hadn't prepared him for this. He put his foot on a crack in the wall and tried to mimic how Cora had used it as leverage. He lost his balance and ended up on the ground. The girl watched him worriedly from the top of the wall and reached out her hand. Kaio took his friend's extended hand, propelling himself up. The sudden ringing of Kaio's phone startled them, reverberating in the heavy silence, and they both fell from their positions, still on the wrong side of the wall.
Crap. It's Grandma,
grumbled Kaio, massaging one of his legs, without bothering to look at the caller ID.
She said I had to be back before dark. If she found my report card, she's going to kill me.
Cora wiped her scraped hands on her jeans.
Go ahead then,
she encouraged him. When Kaio was grounded, it was almost as if she were being punished too. She knew it wasn't Donna Jeruz's intention, it wasn't her fault if she hardly had any friends.
I'll call you later.
Sorry, Cora.
He apologized, untying his bike.
We'll do your crazy parkour another day.
Okay.
In less than 5 minutes, he had turned the corner and disappeared from sight, the first drops of rain chasing after him. Cora stared at the wall in front of her. A lightning bolt split the sky. If she didn't protect her box today, she had no guarantees it would work tomorrow. She scaled the wall again, still a little sore from the fall, and sat on top to admire the other side for a moment. She could see the canister where she had hidden her box, lying inconspicuously among the uneven grass. The tear was still there, hidden, but as real as the rain. The girl let herself dangle from the wall and land among the tall shrubs. The ground was slippery and damp from the drizzle. She navigated the hidden obstacles among the tall grass. When she reached into the canister, she saw that her box had gained a rust stain. But despite that, it had survived the weekend well. Her fingers traced the damaged cardboard. Perhaps she had counted on Kaio's presence to give her courage, someone who could see the beauty and adventure she was beginning to perceive as full of danger and inconvenience. But in his absence, she still had to face the tear. She still had to finish what she had started and save the compass. Cora sighed and stripped off her jacket, using it as a shield over the cardboard. The rain hit her, cold and steady, and she sat on the grass in front of the tear with her box snuggled protectively in her lap. The first stars made themselves visible in the midst of the rain, but the sky was completely cloudy and opaque. The stars shone from another universe, inviting, like a playful secret between her and the anomaly. Cora hugged the box tighter. Having to rely on the tear to take her where she needed to go scared her. The lack of control scared her. She was afraid to embrace something that would abandon her because they weren't a good match. How could she trust the tear after what had happened in the space-bound colony? A lightning bolt split the sky in the distance. Cora was completely soaked. She would have to go home soon. The question was, what to do with her box. A strange noise came from the direction of the tear. Cora stared at it, intrigued. The tear had never made sounds before. Under her inquisitive gaze, the tear began to become more visible, and Cora noticed something floating among the stars. She reached out to touch it, but immediately retracted her arm, unsure if it would be exposed to the vacuum of space. The tear gently deposited an object among the others in the vacant lot. It was larger than anything else, and Cora stared at it, surprised. It was a Valiant uniform, red, gold, and black, complete with the reinforced backpack for extreme environments that the compass had added to it when the crews merged. Somehow, it looked brand new, despite Cora being certain it had just survived a journey through cosmic dust. It was surprisingly helpful, and the girl gave a grateful look to the anomaly. Cora took the backpack off of the crew uniform and put her box inside it. It would serve her better than her school backpack when she was traveling across universes. It was made of a material that resembled firm plastic in consistency. It was waterproof, heat-resistant, cold-resistant, and radiation-resistant, perfect for something that she didn't want to lose. The tear blinked back to invisibility, and Cora ran back home, knowing that the box would be safe the next day. On Monday, the tear took her to a small, windowless room. The first thing Cora saw when she entered was a huge map of the galaxy. This was a good sign. It meant she was in cosmic dust territory, and they weren't hostile to humans. The second thing she noticed was the 8-foot-tall green alien staring at her in amazement from the other side of the room. Cora stopped, embarrassed. The cosmic dust were one of the most interesting societies in that galaxy. You couldn't define them by physical appearance parameters, they were an amalgamation of several species, space hippies who were evicted from their homes by wars they didn't want to fight. One of the things they had in common was an overvaluing of objects that other societies would discard, because, in general, no one marched an entire army to a strange planet to recover worthless junk. And of course, there were the maps, huge, imprecise, and everywhere. The one Cora saw when she entered took up an entire wall, but the alien also had a smaller one hanging on himself, tied around his chest like a smock. The whole galaxy looked like a large ring with a dazzling, golden center, very different from the spirals of the Milky Way. Strapped around a chest like that, it almost looked like a target, blue and yellow, right where the heart would be in a human. The alien continued to say nothing. He just stared at her, astonished, as if she had done something extremely scandalous, like pulled back the shower curtain while he was bathing or something. He was tall and elongated, with light green skin, a pointed nose, and huge black eyes, the perfect alien stereotype. The paw stretched on.
"Oh, hello,"
the girl finally said, waving in what she hoped was a friendly way.
"Hello. Greetings,"
he replied, recovering his composure. His voice, despite being surprised, was clear and extremely pleasant to the ears.
Okan didn't realize there was another ship in the vicinity.
I didn't come by spaceship,"
Cora began. She abandoned the sentence without offering an alternative explanation. She glanced briefly at the map in the corner.
"Actually, I don't know where I am. Could you help me? My name is Cora."
Okan's head inflated and deflated in quick succession. Cora tried to stare without being rude. He looked, if possible, even more bewildered than she did.
"You don't know where you are, Cora?"
the tall, gentle alien repeated. She shook her head. He led her to a window.
"Okan hasn't seen a human in years. It must have been difficult for you to come back here. Okan is sorry for the loss of your home."
Cora scrutinized the scene without understanding. Out the window, she could see a pile of junk, shattered ships hovering adrift. She couldn't understand why Okan would think she had ever lived in any of them. And then she saw it, the destroyed planet. Rendered into a portion of asteroids, spiraled in the distance, orbiting around what was left of open sky. The anomaly stretched its tentacles in the background, dark and menacing, the black heart of that star system, somberly usurping the place the star should have rightfully occupied. Cora lost her breath. The Valiant and Compass had never been able to return to see what was left of their home, but there she was, an intruder in someone else's tragedy.
"It's a shame what happened to the human colonies,"
the alien continued in his serene voice.
"Okan's people are nomadic, so Okan cannot say that he remembers what it means to lose a home, but you have Okan's sympathy."
Okan laid a comforting hand on the girl's shoulder, and the gesture made her feel horrible. He had confused her with someone from the colonies, and she didn't know whether to correct the mistake. She didn't know how she would correct such a mistake, because if she already felt helpless, she couldn't even imagine what someone who had lost an entire world or civilization would feel in her place. She could see the alien's reflection in the window glass, and Okan also looked extremely uncomfortable. Cora was relieved that it wasn't just her. She decided to change the subject.
"Are you passing through here?"
she asked, confused. She embraced the confusion. She felt that it was a more productive theme for a conversation in which one of the members materialized in midair than sadness.
"Okan is organizing what's left,"
he replied.
"Oh, so this is a junkyard, then?"
Cora smiled, delighted. Okan nodded his head amicably, his version of a smile in response.
"And a thing still intact?"
"There's a lot of stuff in good condition. There's a lot of stuff that Okan doesn't know what it is,"
he admitted. Cora examined the junkyard hesitantly.
"If you're organizing things, do you think you could give me a ride around? To see what's left? I'm looking for something that might be lost out there."
"Okan would be happy to take you wherever you need. What are you looking for, Cora?"
"A portable engine. Something I can carry. They sold them in Open Sky, that big ship."
Okan's face swelled thoughtfully, and he led the girl by the hand to the cabin, murmuring that he remembered seeing something like that. Cora examined the hand that wrapped around hers with curiosity. It was green and elongated and had fewer fingers. There was much about her own travels that she didn't know. She didn't know how the tear worked or if it was the reason why people in this universe sometimes seemed more real to her than those in her own. It was a bit like lifting a veil. Was it the tear that made the emotions of those people so much easier to read? Okan wasn't human, didn't use human expressions, and yet she understood him perfectly. She had always assumed that other humans spoke her language somehow, that she understood them better because she had spent hours watching them from a distant universe. Why was Okan easy to understand too? Okan's command room was basically a large window and a few controls. Cora, used to the 200 different monitors of human command rooms, found it hilarious. It was like driving a space van. And then Okan began to pilot, and the fun flew out the window because there were no seatbelts. The ship jostled through space in a disturbing way. The entire cabin shook with coughs from an unstable engine, and small asteroids rained down on the vehicle's exterior like a storm. Cora instinctively held on, whitened joints squeezing the seat. She wondered if maybe Okan didn't routinely travel long distances in this part of space. Maybe he landed from ship to ship like a bee. She couldn't understand how the ship would still be intact otherwise. At some point, she decided to ask how Okan avoided larger objects. Regret was instant.
Okan just remembers where everything is,
he assured her.
Besides, Okan has good visual acuity.
She murmured, not at all comforted, her eyes involuntarily widening.
And what happens if we crash?
If we crash too hard, Okan's ship could break, just like any other day in space. But don't worry, the ship is tough and Okan is a good pilot.
I believe
she encouraged. The sentence cut off when a jolt threw her a foot above her seat, the artificial gravity pulling her back with brutality. She diplomatically added,
Have you ever thought of using a computer to help you navigate?
Okan inflated and deflated in quick successions, contemplative.
Okan doesn't understand much about navigation computers.
Cora nodded her head and shifted position to be able to hug the seat. Knowledge was quite heterogeneous among the cosmic dusts. She assumed that Okan had greater talents in other areas, such as craftsmanship or mechanics. Anchoring in open sky was surprisingly easy in comparison. Okan docked in a huge hole that cut the larger ship from end to end. It was a natural hangar, and then directed Cora to the back of his small ship with ease. He calmly explained how they would stay alive during the transition. The smaller ship would temporarily extend its force fields and life support to the larger ship. This would protect them from the vacuum of space and allow them to transit safely, he assured her. The hatch depressurized with a hiss and exposed the ruins like the opening of a crypt. Open sky groaned in the darkness. The empty corridors gave it a ghostly air, the signs of civilization projecting a shadow of ancient glory. It was unrecognizable compared to the last time she had been there. It was like walking onto the Titanic after the iceberg. Cora took the first step, which turned out to be a stumble.
Be careful, young human, Okan's force field doesn't make the floor any more stable.
Cora nodded her head frantically, her feet now feeling around suspiciously. Gravity was short-circuiting, and she could see the stars, shining threateningly through holes in the floor and walls. She tried to take another step and ended up being thrown a few meters ahead, landing abruptly when the ground remembered to pull her back to itself. She clung more tightly to the pieces of wall that were still there. Okan followed graciously, as if he did this type of thing every week, and maybe he did. He sent a lantern ahead of them, a glowing ball that floated in the air as if weightless, and then extended a hand to serve as a second support for Cora's unsteady steps. The open sky mezzanine, once a symbol of prosperity and exchange in the spacebound colony, had almost completely collapsed and was unusable, piled up in a heap of metal in the center of a huge hall.
How do we get up there?
Cora asked shakily.
Do we have to climb?
Okan pulled a strange little device out of somewhere in his clothes. It was a disc the size of a palm and had some kind of antenna.
This should reduce gravity so that Okan and Cora can jump to the top. Have you done this before, Cora?
The girl shook her head, fascinated.
Hold on tight to Okan's arm, then. It's dangerous. You could lose your balance and get hurt.
Cora clung to the alien's arm with both hands. It was like holding onto a twig.
Hold on tight and jump with Okan,
instructed the alien. Cora flexed her knees. Okan jumped, pulling her gently with him. Cora felt her feet leave the floor and watched, with butterflies in her stomach, as they flew up the mountain of debris. They landed inside one of the establishments on the mezzanine. The decrepit floor gave way under Cora's feet. Okan grabbed her before she could tumble. The reduced gravity would cushion the fall, but Cora guessed that rolling down a pile of rubble would still make a mess. The interior of the shops were also unrecognizable. Okan seemed to have done quite the renovation. There were no holes that would damage the ship, but the walls that connected the rooms had almost all been demolished, forming a single huge room. Cora's mind filled with an encyclopedia of questions. How had the roof been removed? How had the new roof been sewn into place? How had the walls been demolished? How was it possible to move cathedral-sized engines from one place to another without breaking the unstable flooring? She swallowed them all in favor of the most pragmatic doubt.
You seem like you've been here before. Right. Have you seen any engines around here that I could carry? Something the size of my backpack, maybe.
Okan's head swelled and deflated thoughtfully as he led the way, pulling her hand. Gravity was more stable on this floor, Cora noticed with curiosity. Young, curious eyes scanned the succession of retired machines. This area reminded her of the future museum she had read about in the Time Machine. It was fascinating and macabre, as if Cora were facing the extent of all human history, a human history that no one in her universe had ever seen, but was waiting for a Morlock at every turn. And with that thought, with the image of the cadaverous monsters that H.G. Wells had conjectured for the future of the human species in her mind, she saw it, covered in dust in a corner, inconspicuously hanging from a pile of larger engines. Was the engine that Daniel had shown her during her visit to his store. Cora stopped, horrified. Numbness spread throughout the girl's body, until all she could feel was nausea. Okan realized she had stopped and paused as well, watching her over his shoulder. The alien followed her gaze and inspected the device curiously.
Okan suspected it was an engine, but Okan doesn't know how to make it work.
Cora approached the machine as if enchanted and stared at it as if it were a venomous animal. The battery, Cora could see, was still in the same place Daniel had put it, as if nothing important had happened since then, except for the end of the world. Cora's knees trembled, and she reached out to turn it on, as Daniel had shown her the week before. The mechanism coughed up a cloud of dust, as if no time had passed since the obvious years it had been forgotten there.
Okan is no expert, but it seems to be working,
murmured the alien, bending down to put a long hand on the girl's trembling arm. Cora nodded. She felt small and powerless.
Is it okay if I take this one with me?
She stammered in a whisper.
Okan can help carry it back to the ship,
he offered kindly.
Don't trouble yourself.
Cora thanked him with a weak smile.
I have other means of transportation. If you don't mind, I'll be on my way.
The youngster took out the battery Tomi had given her and hesitated for a moment before offering it to the friendly alien. She quickly explained what it was, a piece of technology from a distant galaxy. Okan made a motion to refuse. He seemed a little frightened.
Okan's people don't believe in payment. Not like this,
he explained.
But your people believe in giving purpose to things that others no longer see as useful. The person who gave this to me isn't expecting it back. Don't you at least want to see if you can find a use for it?
Cora placed the object in his hand, and Okan lowered his gaze to examine it for a moment. When he looked up again, both the girl and the engine had disappeared. On Tuesday afternoon, the portal opened up on the same terrace that Cora had come to associate with Tomi, and the girl slid decisively to the other side, leaving the vacant lot behind her.
Wow! This looks way cooler than a spaceship ride.
A voice greeted her from the other side. Cora froze with a start. The owner of the voice was a boy. He was short and skinny, with dark skin, light eyes, a little younger than her, and curly hair cascading in an irregular cut sprinkled with braids. He was dressed in children's clothes from the time, light, loose, and unisex. Cora was absolutely certain she had never seen him before. For a moment, she stammered, frozen, searching her brain for some lie she could tell to explain the scene. And then the boy giggled, and Cora noticed that he didn't seem too surprised to have seen someone materialize out of thin air.
You look like you've seen a ghost, lady. My stepmom doesn't like teleportation either,
he said conversationally.
They sent me to pick you up here. Cora, right? They said you were arriving today and don't know the city very well. Come with me.
The boy entered the building and navigated the corridors with short, quick steps that left Cora confused and running to keep up.
Are there people waiting for me?
She gasped. The boy frowned and looked over his shoulder.
Yeah. A weird crew that rented a lab nearby. You're friends, right? You're all foreigners, like Katerine, aren't you?
Cora, who was still trying to figure out who the hell her friends were and who Katerine was spared from answering by her bewildered expression as she watched two robots pass by on a flying cart. The boy, with another of his giggles, seemed to take that as a response in its own merit. Cora, who had been busy processing her surroundings for the first time, didn't pay him any attention. The building they were in seemed to be almost entirely made of glass. Except for the terrace and external walls, Cora would swear she could see at least 5 floors away. Robots and androids mingled with humans, and people defied the boundaries of each category. A huge several stories deep hole gave access, through the middle of the room, to those with flying vehicles.
Going down,
shouted the boy, and Cora suddenly found herself surrounded by people in a transparent elevator. He pulled her towards a chair and gestured impatiently.
Put on your seatbelt, woman. And hold on to your backpack tight. We're going down.
Cora, a bit dazed, placed her reinforced backpack on her lap and instinctively fastened the seatbelt buckle. The elevator plummeted, and Cora let out a surprised yelp, curving her arms around her belongings. It moved faster than an amusement park ride, and she felt a surge of adrenaline, as if her heart would jump out of her mouth and join her stomach, which surely had remained on the terrace. The elevator stopped abruptly, and the boy, laughing, stood up to help her undo the stubborn buckle with his trembling hands.
It's a bit scary the first time,
he whispered conspiratorially, as if exchanging a secret with the older girl. They followed the crowd rushing towards the enormous door of a lobby.
Don't tell me you use this thing every day,
retorted Cora, a little out of breath.
What do you do with people who have heart problems?
The boy made a confused face.
We take them to the doctor. Why do you ask?
The outside was, for Cora, as interesting as the inside. For starters, there was much more vegetation than you would normally see in a typical city on her Earth. The asphalt of the streets had disappeared, replaced by a resilient and soft grass. Here and there, among the people who wandered and the children who played, towers emerged from the ground, tall and decidedly artificial. Cora suspected, from previous observations, that they were used to recharge vehicles and portable devices. Occasionally a person would fly by on a floating platform, but in general, they seemed to converge towards large wagons that left from the central building. The boy guided her through one of the side streets while Cora, open-mouthed, tried to take it all in at once. She knew a lot about the compass, but until then, she hadn't had the opportunity to explore this different version of Earth, with its metal people, flowered pavements, and mixed society that seemed to contradict every pessimistic prediction of the 21st century. It seemed like an idyllic dream of some futuristic hippie. Her steps, accustomed to the asphalt, wobbled on the soft grass, and she was sure that, if not for her guide, she would be completely disoriented among buildings covered in vines and solar panels. The boy stopped, and Cora halted on her tiptoes just in time to avoid a collision.
Here we are. This is it,
he said, pointing at the building in front of him. He made a motion to walk away, but Cora grabbed his hand.
Wait. Aren't you coming in with me?
Why would I?
He replied, raising an eyebrow.
I agreed to bring you here, I brought you here. Sheesh, lady. You should coordinate your appointments better with people, you know? It's a busy planet. See you later.
Cora stared at him as he turned the corner, not understanding, and then looked at where she was. The building was short and narrow, crowned by a circular glass dome. It wasn't exactly the most intimidating thing in the universe, and with that thought, she opened the front door. Many faces turned towards her as soon as she crossed the threshold, and she looked back at them, surprised. They were all familiar to her, Jane and Tam's crew that she had rescued little by little over the months. They hadn't changed much. Several still wearing their uniforms.
Well, it is quite about time,
Greeted one of the closest. Cora couldn't remember his name, laughing.
You are not the most organized of people, are you, dear?
Cora hesitated, stunned, and the man, almost a foot taller than her, extended his hand in courtesy.
I previously mentioned my intention to summon reinforcements,
said Tommy, smiling for the first time since Cora had met her. It was a reluctant smile, but it was there.
But you could have made it easier to find all my personnel.
The man shaking Cora's hand laughed.
Judging by the look on her face, it appears she is going to need help remembering who your personnel are.
He gave the girl a brilliant smile and added in a confidential tone,
My name is Lucas. However, I am also known as Marino.
I can see why,
said Cora, letting go of his hand several shades darker than hers. Moreno laughed and messed up the teen's long braid with his fingers in response. Cora felt a hand land on her shoulder and followed the pale arm up to Ida's face, Becca's sister, staring at her with calculating blue eyes framed by rebellious blonde hair. Ida ran her hand over the exo backpack inquisitively, like a teacher who caught a student misbehaving. Cora flinched. Ida offered her a crooked smile.
Ida, ex-first officer of the Valiant.
She introduced herself unnecessarily.
How's my sister doing?
Fine,
Cora replied, stuttering.
Awesome. Come check out what we've done,
the former first officer invited, pulling the girl towards the back of the room.
Most everything's ready, but we were waiting for you with an engine to wrap things up.
Cora allowed herself to look around as she was pulled towards the back of the room. The sitting room was small but organized, full of chemicals she had never seen before and machines completely beyond her time, yet recognizably a laboratory. Cora couldn't define what it was, but there was something there that completely clashed with everything she had seen of the architecture of this city so far. Maybe the machines were more robust, the colors stronger, the angles more aggressive. The room reminded her of the Valiant. The faces of the occupants, Cora noted apprehensively, were not all friendly. Some looked sad or apathetic, others had an angry or even hopeless look. A pair of twins, hunched over a piece of machinery, began to aggressively cut the metal, staring at her as if they were thinking of sawing her next. Cora shuddered. Moreno placed a hand on the girl's shoulder in solidarity, and she gave him a grateful look. A narrow staircase led up to the upper floors. There was a group of people sitting on the steps, blocking the way. A large, muscular woman with colorful braids animatedly told a story to the others. Cora heard her say in a space-bound colony accent,
And there I was, surrounded by Gutula ships, in a busted escape pod, smack in the middle of a battlefield, and this girl pops up out of nowhere. We need to get out of here. You want to die? And I'm standing there thinking, wow, the afterlife sure is different from what they told us. Nobody ever mentioned a teenage girl with braids showing up in your final moments. And then I look around, and where's the pod? Where are the ships? Where are the things? She ditched me right in the middle of some forest, some research camp, I don't know. And you lot are whining about the cities on this planet. It had been ages since I saw rain. And all of a sudden, I got a waterfall up in my face. And I'm like, what?
The girl hid her face in her shirt, embarrassed. The people listening to the story laughed and turned to wave friendly and clap for the passing youth. Tommy opened a door at the back of the room with a scowl. It led to another room, hidden behind a solid wall, and Ida led Cora by the hand, followed silently by Moreno. They were greeted by one or two familiar faces, a red-haired man with big ears and a faded scar marking his face, and a black woman with a round face, dreadlocks and curls in her long hair. They respectfully nodded towards Tommy and then returned to their welding on the workbench.
I don't know if I should hug you, Jane style, or punch you, Tam style,
said Ida as soon as the door closed, leaning down to Cora's level. The girl assumed the intention was to comfort her, but she found it intimidating.
You were right, and this planet is all kinds of welcoming. I think they haven't seen a war in centuries. They're so dang kind, it's annoying. The bummer, though, is that you left us worried about the compass and the Valiant. We're still waiting. So, what did you bring in that thing?
Ida unfastened the straps of the exo backpack and opened it with familiarity, exposing the portable engine in Cora's cardboard box.
"Oh, aren't you a beauty?"
she praised. She ignored the box and reverently took the engine out of the backpack. She turned to face the other two whom Cora had not yet been introduced to.
"Hey, look at this. When was the last time we saw one of these things? It's a little beat up, but still."
The other occupants of the room gathered around to examine the object with interest.
"Wow, this one's pretty cute, ain't it, Isha? I reckon it'll make a fine stew,"
joked the woman with dreadlocks in a space-bound colony accent, playing with the machine's wires.
"And it's pocket-sized too,"
replied the red-haired man, displaying broken teeth in a crooked smile.
"Take a gander at this, Allie. It even comes with its own battery."
Tommy carefully held the engine, taking it from the blonde woman's arms.
"The fitting is not the best,"
she commented.
"Greggs will not be pleased with the abomination we will be forced to build. Kindly assist me, Moreno."
Moreno grabbed the engine from the other end and the five of them squeezed together to work on it on the workbench. Cora watched them from the corner of the room. Now that she had a chance to organize her thoughts for a few minutes, questions jumbled up in her mouth, trying to come out all at once. The first one to succeed, to her surprise, was,
"How did you guys get this place?"
Ida gave her a sidelong glance over her shoulder, the corners of her eyes wrinkled in an amused smile.
"These crazy pacifists aren't all there, you know. One of the fellas who's been here the longest was like, yo, I want a lab and a welder, and they were, sure, go for it. No charge. There's a bunch of them upstairs. A bunch of hippies, each and every one of them. Who would have thought that, in another galaxy, humans are practically cosmic dust?"
Cora made a confused face and approached another end of the workbench, where a semi-constructed machine was resting. She turned the piece to have something to do with her hands. She had the feeling she was going to find out what it did firsthand later. She sighed and looked at the door thoughtfully.
"How are you guys doing?"
she asked, without looking at the others.
"Well, overall, surprised that this lovely piece of junk functions at all,"
said Tommy, not taking her eyes off her work.
"We will need to create power output adapters and rebuild a good chunk of it. You should have the equipment in a few hours."
"In terms of vibes, some of us are doing better than others,"
offered Ida, pointing her thumb at Tommy.
"But I think we need to talk about your plan. You said you wanted this for the compass, so we've been working based on that info, but it would be way easier to hook it up to the Valiant."
"The Valiant was destroyed,"
Cora said absent-mindedly. When she had told Tommy the situation a few days before, she had only mentioned what she had considered strictly necessary for the execution of her plan, and this detail had been left out.
"Ah,"
came the disappointed interjection from behind her. Cora turned to look at them and found 4 worried faces and Tommy biting her lip.
"Everyone survived. It was just the ship,"
the girl reassured quickly.
"I think I remember to mention how I got into this mess. Did I remember? Erie was going to join you guys, but the compass got to him before I did."
"Dearie? That damn telepath would be really invaluable around here."
Moreno's face lit up and he added, under Cora's inquisitive gaze,
"I was once part of his team before you took me out of there. He certainly knows how to improve a group's morale. The people here would benefit from some help in adjusting. We decided to keep our identity secret until the compass arrives, so people are not using Earth's system here for fear of being exposed. That's regrettable because we cannot take care of each other when we're scattered around like this."
A shadow passed over her face, and Cora felt her heart tighten.
"How are you all doing?"
she repeated. The other occupants seemed to better understand the meaning of the question this time. Ida shrugged.
"These people are tough,"
she stubbornly said.
"They've been through a lot."
"Exactly,"
agreed Allie.
"They've been through a lot. A peaceful planet is very nice, very beautiful and all, but it doesn't sit well with those who come from war. Not everyone is adjusting as well as they could."
"It's going to be all downhill from here,"
added Isha, his voice overflowing with disdain.
"Especially because we lost our home and, from what I understood, won't be able to get it back. Me? I never had family in the colonies. I raised myself up in open sky. My family was the Valiant and the Compass, so if it's rebuilding from here on out, I'm fine with it. But some of the other guys don't have the same experience, and they're resentful of losing it all and having to start from scratch on a strange planet.
And some of us still have kin there,
Tommy interjected in a murmur.
You cannot expect everyone to embrace this when all we have is your word that they are a rather precarious version of safe.
Cora gave Ida a guilty look. The older woman shrugged, but conceded.
I think we gotta sit down and discuss this plan of yours together. I got the impression that we're going to need to make some adjustments to it.
There are like 50 people outside,
Cora complained.
I'm sorry, do you fancy better writing out the plan on little notes?
The older woman asked sarcastically. Around 50 of the survivors of the joint cruise of the Compass and the Valiant settled into the small room as best they could, sitting on chairs, tables, stools, and steps. Cora felt like she was presenting a school project, a very bad one, judging by the expressions of the people around her. She discreetly hid in the back and let the adults talk, interjecting timid murmurs and brief corrections where she noticed the group's information was incorrect.
So, to recap. You want to use the engine to maintain a shield around the compass, or what's left of it, the whole time it's in that nebula,
Ida said with a question in her tone.
Heart of gold,
Cora instinctively completed.
Where is that?
She heard someone say.
In the narrow part of the Gutula territory.
Another voice replied.
It's an emission nebula that divides the border with the...
Ida hissed to silence them.
All right. So this engine hooks up to the central generator rotor, like any other, but we'll be using the conversion function instead of impulse. I want problems, people. Start listing them.
You know this little bugger can't sustain the whole ship, right?
Cautioned Isha.
For starters, it overheats in no time.
The engine design kinda sucks for what we need it to do.
Allie considered.
It's made to use one fuel at a time, but the propellant ions could be saved to feed the fusion reactor, and the reactor's electrons could be used to power the propellant. You could switch between them depending on power and cooling needs. We can optimize the functions with 2 interfeeding fuel chambers, but we gotta find a way to get this engine to keep working continuously.
The Compass has a main engine that shall bear the brunt of the work. This one is solely for the force field,
said Tommy.
They still have 2 cooling chambers in the remaining part of the ship. Someone will fit a cooler for this, for sure. Our chief concern will be the generator. The Compass only has one. Connecting a new engine to it would make it work beyond the recommended limit, and there is a possibility it will overheat and collapse before they can do the rest.
A heavy silence fell over the room, and the gears turned in each of their brains.
Your plan is madness, Cora,
Tommy observed. Cora didn't respond. She bit her lip, thinking furiously as she examined the equipment that had been offered to her. Then she rolled up her sleeves and began opening the cabinets. The whole room watched her, stunned.
Do you have a cart around here? Or one of those flying platforms I saw outside?
Cora asked.
Cora?
Moreno asked.
There's what you can do and what you can't do,
she muttered almost to herself.
What you can't do is ask me to carry 30 pounds of engine on my arm strength.
Cora, weren't you paying attention?
Ida scolded.
Your plan ain't gonna work.
Cora stopped in her search and gave the adult a confused look.
Why not?
That nebula will be the death of them, Cora.
Ida replied, visibly annoyed.
No. The compass isn't fast, the compass doesn't have firepower. The heart of gold is exactly why this plan will work. It's on the political border between the Aker and the Gutchular, which means neither of them will dare enter it to retrieve the compass. They're locked in a territorial dispute. Neither of them has the appropriate ships to withstand the nebula. And neither of them can afford to appear weak in front of the other. This will give the compass all the time they need to survive.
But what if the engine explodes before then?
Cora shrugged.
You're not dealing with helpless people. It's like you don't know the compass crew. They turn straw into gold, they just need a little push. We don't need to solve everything. What we can solve is enough.
There was a pause as everyone digested this information.
So, do you want to add anything else to it before I go?
Hand me that engine,
Tommy said resignedly.
Let's make a fitting that works.
Tam and Jane exchanged looks aboard the Compass. The girl had just disappeared and they both knew the other had let it go unsaid, but they were afraid she wouldn't come back. They feared, panic etched in the depths of their eyes, that they had been deceived, had entered a trap that could have been avoided somehow, and that their crew would pay for their mistake. A silent understanding passed between them.
Keep us alive, Tam,
the captain said.
Likewise, Jane,
the other captain replied. As they left the infirmary, Jane turned right towards the engine room, and Tam turned left towards the command room. Greg and Becca glanced briefly at the door when they realized their captain had entered it and then got right back to their tasks.
Oh, stars. Was the command room destroyed and we weren't informed?
Cursed Greg, not moving away from the engine he was working on.
Consider my presence here your permission to sacrifice communication, if necessary. Command security protocol. Whenever the situation is precarious and communications are threatened to fail, one of the command officers stays at their post and the other goes to the center of conflict inside the ship.
Jane mechanically recited as she quickly navigated an empty panel. Jane stared at the screen, confused for a moment, and then determinedly looked at her machinery crew.
I want those who fully understood what Cora did with our shields to speak up,
she commanded. Morrow, who had been wedged under the engine, waved her blue hand in confirmation.
Morrow, trade places with me,
Jane ordered.
You are realigning the engine, are you not? That is something I can perform also. I require you with your head and hands free.
Morrow got up fluidly, and Jane threw herself under the engine.
I require you to brainstorm every conceivable fuel source that we may utilize to sustain these shields and devise a plan to prolong their operation to the utmost,
Jane yelled.
Greg, Becca, I want to see you both working on the emergency exit. If you lack sufficient personnel to give the overlighted jumpstart, I shall send them down from other parts of the ship. Anyone who possesses the skill to use a screwdriver is at your disposal.
She pushed one of the engine parts with her shoulders. The machine responded by pushing her back. Her shoulder blades hit the ground hard, and she groaned in pain. She hoped with all her might that Tam was having better luck than she was because they would need a miracle. To an outside observer, the Compass was like a desperate salmon swimming upstream among a pack of hungry bears. The enemy ship's shots cascaded harmlessly off the powerful shield that had unexpectedly appeared, but the missing pieces betrayed the true situation in a mutilated, grotesque, and violent view. In reality, one could almost hear the last dying gasps of the ship echoing through the vacuum of space. The commander of the Akka was absolutely confident that they would cement a border truce negotiated over the carcass of the last wild humans in the galaxy that very night. Even if the battle extended to the Heart of Gold, which seemed to be the destination of the small ship, it was only a matter of time until the shields failed. Yes, the Akka were completely certain of their victory, and then something happened. With a flash, the Compass blinked into the fabric of space and, in the next second, all sensors on all other ships had gone dark, and the Akka's own one-solid shields dangerously wavered under the merciless and radioactive gaze of the Heart of Gold. They were flying blind and defenseless. This has been The Girl and the Tear in the Universe, Story 2 of Cora Meirelles. Thank you for listening.